Crystal Rogers was a mother of 5 living in Bardstown, Kentucky. Over 4th of July weekend in 2015, she stopped answering calls. Her daughter tried reaching her first, then contacted Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard. At first, Sherry wasn't concerned, but Crystal always stayed in close contact with her children and family. On July 5th, 2015, a family member reported Crystal missing to the sheriff's office. Shortly after, another relative found her car abandoned at a 14-mile marker on the Bluegrass Parkway. The discovery raised immediate concern. One tire was flat, the keys were in the ignition, a cell phone and purse sat in the passenger seat. No woman would leave those items behind if she was simply abandoning her vehicle. The last person known to be with Crystal was her boyfriend, Nick Houck. They lived together in Bardstown and shared a young son. Brooks was cooperative with investigators from the start. He had even filed to run for sheriff in the previous election. He was a landlord with multiple rental properties that Crystal helped manage. Crystal was devoted to her children. She had a large network of family support in Bardstown, where she was born and raised. People described her as an exceptional mother, someone born for that role. Relationships had always been difficult for her. She had been married once before and it didn't work out. She struggled to find someone who truly loved and respected her. Brooks came from a prominent local family that owned a 200-acre farm in Kentucky. He was close to his family members. One of them, his brother Nick, was a police officer in that county. Investigators began retracing Crystal's steps. Her car on the parkway pointed toward Elizabethtown, suggesting she might have been traveling somewhere. Her mother and children mentioned they had been to Walmart that Friday. Detectives sent someone to get security footage, looking for who Crystal might have interacted with, whether she talked to anyone, whether she appeared to argue with anyone. Bardstown was already dealing with 3 unsolved murders before Crystal disappeared. When a mother of 5 suddenly vanished, fear spread through the community. Every day, people searched. The lead detective interviewed Brooks that Sunday evening. Brooks explained that Friday during the day had been normal. Crystal dropped 2 of the children off to their father. She went to Walmart. He got home before she did. They had been planning to go to the farm that evening with their youngest son, Eli. He said they left their house and drove toward the farm, staying there somewhere between 11 and midnight before going home. When they got home, Crystal and Eli stayed up while Brooks went to bed. The next morning, she wasn't there. Eli was in bed with him. Her car was gone, but Brooks wasn't overly concerned because she had left before when they had been arguing. The detective asked if they had been arguing. Brooks said they had not. This raised a question. Why would he mention she would leave when they argued if they weren't arguing? On July 8th, Brooks came in again. The detective asked him to write out a detailed statement about everything he did that weekend, particularly that Friday. The statement Brooks wrote focused more on what he did every day rather than the specific events surrounding Crystal's disappearance. A neighbor reported seeing Crystal arrive home around 5:15 that Friday. Brooks said they left for the farm about 19 minutes after sunset. When they got to the farm, they saw his mother, Rosemary, who lived there. According to surveillance video, they appeared to leave around 5 minutes before midnight. Taking a 2.5-year-old out on the farm that late at night seemed unusual. Brooks said Eli was used to staying up late and sleeping in the next morning. He claimed Crystal stayed up after they got home, playing games on her phone. Investigators later discovered her phone had been powered off for a while at that point. Brooks's timeline was contradictory and disjointed. He said he went to the farm on Saturday morning and wasn't in any rush. He ate dinner at his uncle's house at his mother's brother's place. He thought they rode with his mother over there, then he went home afterward. The day after Crystal went missing, Brooks was at a 4th of July party with his son. Instead of searching for his girlfriend, he was at a gathering with fireworks and hot dogs. Brooks mentioned meeting Crystal's mother, Sherry, at a gas station one of those days. He said Sherry asked if he had seen Crystal. He told her he hadn't seen her and didn't know where she was. Sherry said she was going to the police station. When asked if he and Crystal ever talked about breaking up, Brooks admitted they had fought like any other couple and that the relationship had been strained at times. But he said they loved each other very much. He used the past tense, which people later pointed Brooks talked about how he now had to be a single parent to Eli and how Crystal's absence would affect their son. He complained that being questioned was taking energy and effort away from other efforts to bring Crystal back safely. He said he couldn't even go out on the side of the road without looking like a murderer. He mentioned hiring an auctioneer to sell all his things so he could be there for Eli. The suggestion that he would sell his belongings if he thought Crystal was coming back seemed odd. Brooks went on about Crystal's family clearly upset, but his focus seemed to be more on how this impacted him and Eli rather than Crystal's disappearance itself. He said he wasn't alarmed when she was gone because she had done this before. He accused her family of dragging his name through the mud when they knew him better than that. Brooks didn't seem concerned at all about being at the sheriff's department discussing the missing mother of his child. The detective noticed Brooks had only reached out to Crystal a couple of times in those first few days. Brooks explained he would rather leave her alone than make things worse. This explanation seemed unconvincing. If someone isn't answering calls after a couple of hours and is still gone days later, doesn't explain why you wouldn't keep trying. Phone records didn't show much fighting between them. There were few text messages, and nothing indicated they had been arguing that night. The biggest thing absent from the phones was any plan to go to the farm. All day Friday, Crystal had been telling people they were going out on a kid-free date night. She told her friend Christina that they had a sitter for the evening and were excited to enjoy their first time being kid-free in a while. When confronted with this, Brooks said he didn't know why Crystal would lie. He insisted the plan all along was to go to the farm. He claimed Crystal only told people they were going on a date night so the other children wouldn't be jealous that they were spending time with Eli alone. But Crystal had told her best friend, someone who wouldn't care either way. Cell phone records showed an odd phone call around midnight on Saturday morning. When the detective asked about it, Brooks seemed genuinely surprised. The call lasted only 13 seconds. Brooks said he didn't know who the number belonged to. He called it right there in the interview room. A man named Steve Lawson answered. Brooks asked if he remembered calling really late the other night. Steve said he called to ask for numbers for a rental house. Brooks said he told Steve he would call Crystal to handle it because she managed the rental properties. When the detective pointed out that if Crystal was in the truck next to Brooks when Steve called, why didn't Brooks just hand the phone to Crystal? Brooks seemed caught off guard. He struggled to explain, saying that late at night, Crystal wouldn't deal with work stuff, and he probably tried to answer quickly so it wouldn't wake Eli, even though he had just said Eli was wide awake. That moment made it clear that both Brooks and Steve Lawson had something to do with Crystal's disappearance. Steve Lawson and his son Joey also worked for Brooks. Both had criminal backgrounds. Steve refused to bring in his cell phone, even when investigators had a search warrant for it. During the interview, Brooks's phone rang. It was his brother Nick, the local police officer. Brooks took the call on speaker. Nick seemed to be advising him to leave. Brooks told Nick he was innocent and hadn't done anything wrong. Nick appeared to be warning him that innocent people get jammed up. Brooks said he didn't think Crystal had run off with another guy. After hanging up, Brooks made a revealing comment. He said Nick thinks they're trying to screw us. Not trying to screw me, but us. Brooks had just put his brother somehow involved in this case. The fact that Nick was a city police officer made everything more complicated. Brooks took a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive. Brooks later appeared on a national news program, the only media interview he granted. He said he realized Crystal was gone the next morning. He slept through the whole night without realizing she had left. He talked about exhausting his efforts with law enforcement to clear his name, saying that was very important to him. Brooks continued living his life in Bardstown, by most accounts, acting like nothing was wrong. Investigators interviewed Nick Houck. They asked how much interaction he had with Crystal over the years. Nick said almost none, though he admitted he knew her well enough to recognize her car. The city police had been helping gather video footage and find witnesses. Now investigators had to rethink that because Nick was potentially involved in the crime. Nick said he found out Crystal was missing within a couple of days, either from Brooks mentioning it or seeing it on TV. For someone whose brother's girlfriend was missing, Nick seemed oddly detached. He and Brooks supposedly weren't that close. They would see each other on the road and that was about it. But days earlier, Nick had called Brooks telling him to leave his police interview. Now he was saying they weren't close. Investigators were confused, and rightfully so. Nick never called Brooks for advice on what to do when Crystal went missing. He claimed they were both too busy and didn't hang out much anymore. Nick was asked if he remembered when Brooks was interviewed. He did. He admitted making a phone call to Brooks during the sheriff's office interview. He said Brooks was a cooperative guy but also needed to protect himself. Nick was confronted about his own whereabouts. He gave inconsistent answers. When asked if he went to the farm the evening of July 8th, the same night Brooks was interviewed, Nick said he didn't remember. Investigators told him cameras caught his car following Brooks to the farm. Nick said that wouldn't surprise him, but claimed he didn't recall what they did out there that night. Police retrieved surveillance video showing Nick in certain locations at certain times, contradicting what he claimed. They took Nick's police car and processed it. The trunk contained a blanket that Nick said he got at the farm to use for moving something. He planned to take it back in a few days, but forgot about it. When investigators tested the trunk with luminol, a chemical that detects blood and bodily fluids, it lit up. There were a couple of spots in the trunk and on the blanket. Nick insisted there shouldn't be any bodily fluids in the trunk. He said he was 100% certain Crystal's DNA wouldn't be found there. Ultimately, investigators said there was no evidence recovered from the blanket. That doesn't mean the blanket wasn't important or wasn't used for something. It just means there was no longer any evidentiary value to it. Nick insisted Brooks didn't have anything to do with Crystal's disappearance. When asked who else would be responsible, he said he didn't have any names to give. He denied helping move a body. When asked to take a polygraph exam, he agreed, saying he had nothing to hide. Days later, Nick took the polygraph. He did not pass the test. The results showed deception, particularly on questions about Crystal and whether he knew where she was. The polygrapher told Nick the time had come to think about the rest of his life. Nick became defensive. Unlike Brooks, who had been calm and almost nonchalant, Nick was the opposite. He raised his voice, insisting he had been 100% truthful. He denied being involved. The polygrapher believed Nick was involved and that they had disposed of Crystal's body. It was enough for Nick to lose his job at the police department. The mayor issued a final order terminating him. In cases without a body, a murder weapon, or even a clear crime scene, prosecutors rely on circumstantial evidence. The lead detective felt there was a strong enough case to charge Brooks before he retired. The Commonwealth attorney did not agree. Without a body or DNA evidence, without clear proof a crime was committed, no charges were filed. The case stalled for months. There were no updates, no movement. About a year after Crystal disappeared, there was an incident that raised more questions. November 19, 2016. Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard, was going hunting with his grandson. They were just getting out of the truck when a gunshot rang out. That single shot went through Tommy's chest and killed him. The case remains open. Everyone believes it's connected to Crystal's disappearance. Through Tommy's efforts to find answers, he uncovered a tip that proved critical. People came to the Ballards with information. Crystal's brother told investigators that some guys saw a white Buick parked in the woods next to the farm the night Crystal went missing. Tommy put out a Facebook post asking about the white Buick. Investigators later discovered the white Buick belonged to Anna Whiteside's, Brooks, and Nick's grandmother. Shortly after investigators found out about the car, Nick took Anna to Louisville and got rid of it. Years passed. 2018, 2019. The investigation continued. Detective John Snow retired. Nearly half a decade of silence followed. The FBI fully took over. In 2021, the FBI conducted a search that took several days. Their focus was a home being built by Brooks in a Bardstown subdivision. They recovered women's underwear and women's clothing. Some were found under the driveway, some under the sidewalk. The DNA did not match Crystal Rogers. Years went by. Brooks, Nick, and the Lawsons remained prime suspects, but none faced charges. Then in 2020, investigators working with another government agency made a discovery no one saw coming. The IRS came in to conduct searches. They had different resources than the FBI. They had legal authority to search electronics under the premise of investigating tax crimes. This led to finding hidden recording devices. Brooks, Nick, the Lawsons, all of them had been recording interactions with police. They recorded conversations with each other. They recorded conversations with their lawyers. Investigators found these recorders during a search warrant of the farm. There were recordings of Nick and the grand jury, recordings of Rosemary, Houck, and the grand jury. Some of those conversations revealed information they probably didn't intend to share. On one recording, Rosemary said to Brooks, "What about the blanket?" He said it was fine. The blanket she was talking about was the blanket in the trunk of Nick's car. The FBI conducted hundreds of new search warrants and interviews, retracing the steps of local law enforcement and creating new paths. They gathered all the evidence collected previously, combing through every inch extensively. They used new technology tools. Google had reverse location technology that showed Brooks's whereabouts even though he had turned off his location services on his phone and told his family to do the same. They had no idea Google was still tracking them. Investigators became more curious about Steve Lawson and that 13-second call. Over the years, they learned Steve and Joey Lawson had trouble keeping their mouths shut. Eventually, investigators heard from one of Steve's ex-girlfriends. She said she overheard a conversation between Steve and Joey about moving a body. When the FBI got involved, they revisited phone records. They looked at Brooks's records, Steve Lawson's records, and Joey Lawson's records. Joey made 2 calls to Steve on the night of Crystal's disappearance. Steve's phone pinged on towers near where Crystal's car was abandoned. Steve and Joey were accused of being involved in the conspiracy to murder Crystal. They were accused of tampering with physical evidence by moving her vehicle. They were both involved in removing her vehicle from her residence and abandoning it on the Bluegrass Parkway. Steve admitted he picked up Joey from the Bluegrass Parkway and moved the driver's seat in Crystal's car to make it look like someone shorter had been driving. They also gave the car a flat tire to stage the scene. Officials learned from another witness, a different employee of Brooks, that Brooks said he wanted to get rid of Crystal, and that Joey Lawson said he would pull her teeth and the hogs would do the rest. It wasn't until 8 years after Crystal's disappearance that anyone was criminally charged. This came about because of efforts by federal agents to remove the Nelson County prosecutor, who wouldn't move forward with charges without a body. In late 2023, a series of grand juries were impaneled. Steve Lawson testified about his involvement in Crystal's disappearance. He was confronted about the phone call. He tried to act like he didn't know what phone call they were talking about, then pretended to suddenly remember. He gave away his involvement by trying to be quote the nature of the call. A special grand jury was assembled for the sole purpose of indicting Brooks. In early September of that year, Joey Lawson was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence. Brooks was indicted for murder and tampering with evidence. He was held on $10 million bond. 3 months later, Steve Lawson was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence. Nick and Rosemary have not been officially charged in connection to this case. A case 10 years in the making culminated with 3 men standing trial. In May 2025, Steve Lawson stood trial and was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence. Just a month later came the trial so many people had been waiting for: Brooks and Joey Lawson. The prosecution laid out their case. Crystal was a young woman, 35 years old, with 5 children. They didn't go out to a romantic gathering that night. At 12:15, 12:18 at night, Brooks was moving from the farm to his home. Crystal wasn't in that truck. She wasn't going home with them. The evidence showed she died at the hands of cruel murder. It was important for jurors to understand the roles of the different players: Brooks, Nick, Joey, and Steve Lawson. A witness testified about overhearing Steve and Joey talking about moving a body at the farm with a skid steer. New information came out during the trial. Crystal went into that evening thinking she was going to have a kid-free romantic date night with Brooks. This was a woman who felt like her relationship was failing. The date night promised to her felt like a glimmer of hope. Prosecutors said it was all part of Brooks's plot to lure her to his family farm. A neighbor testified that the whole time she lived there, she never saw Rosemary or Nick at Brooks's house. But that week, the week Crystal went missing, she saw them there a lot. One day, she witnessed Rosemary's car pull in the driveway. After that, Nick's police car pulled in. They turned the cars around. Nick got in the back of the cop car, grabbed 2 bags, and put them in Rosemary's car. Then he went back and got 2 more. The neighbors said Rosemary and Nick almost never came to Brooks's house because Rosemary did not get along with Crystal. Just a couple of days after Crystal disappeared, Rosemary went to the house and pulled up the flowers Crystal had planted, throwing them in the trash. Another witness testified about a conversation with Joey. Joey said he was burying Crystal's car with a bobcat. Steve had come up to the witness and said Brooks wanted to get rid of his old lady. The white Buick owned by the grandmother came back into the picture. It was believed that car could have been used to transport Crystal's remains. A hair was located in the vehicle. It was microscopically compared with hair from Crystal's hairbrush and determined to be similar in color and limited microscopic characteristics. After the vehicle was seized and processed, a cadaver dog was brought in. The dog gave its trained final response at the right rear corner of the Buick, indicating that was where the strongest scent of human remains was detected. Evidence stacked up against Brooks forensically. Court documents suggested a motive. Brooks had allegedly had an affair just a month before Crystal disappeared. The defense focused on discrediting the state's witnesses and criticizing the police investigation. They said law enforcement focused so narrowly on Brooks that they may have ignored other leads. They argued this was a heartbreaking case where pressure caused facts and truths to be replaced with suspicions, assumptions, guesses, and theories. They said Brooks and Joey were charged with horrific crimes they did not commit. The defense pointed out there was no evidence of any cause or mechanism of death, no body, no other hard evidence that anyone was even killed, let alone who did it. They questioned the cadaver dog, pointing out it was cross-trained for live humans as well as human remains detection. They didn't recommend cross-training or cross-certification of canines. The defense noted that based on evidence collected, no fingerprints of Joey Lawson were found in the car. No DNA of Joey or Steve was found. There was 1 pair of gloves on the driver's seat that could have been tested for DNA and 1 on the driver's side floorboard. Those were not tested. There was no DNA of Crystal Rogers found in the white Buick. The defense tried to say Joey and Steve were never on the Bluegrass Parkway. They claimed cell phone records showed they could have been on a road that ran parallel with the parkway. After 10 days of testimony and more than 50 witnesses, the jury deliberated. It took less than 4 hours for the 12-member jury to come back with their decision. Guilty of murder. Guilty of tampering with physical evidence. Joey Lawson guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of tampering with physical evidence. The case was clearly circumstantial. There was no body found or recovered. There was no witness to the actual event. But the evidence against Brooks included motive. He was already having an affair. Crystal was looking to leave. All the ingredients that make the boyfriend or husband the prime suspect were there. Joey Lawson was sentenced to 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder and 5 years for tampering with physical evidence, for a total of 25 years. Brooks was sentenced to life and 5 years for tampering with physical evidence, with those sentences running concurrently for life. Crystal's mother addressed Brooks at sentencing. "You never cared about anybody but yourself. You say you love Eli so much, but if you really loved him, you wouldn't have murdered his mother. She was an amazing mother. My mom didn't deserve any of this. When you thought you had planned the perfect murder, I guess you're not as smart as you think you are. For 10 years, I have suffered the pain of losing my daughter. Never once have I seen you shed 1 tear." She said she prayed that one day Brooks would grow a heart and have the decency to tell her where her daughter is. Now he will spend the rest of his miserable life in prison where he belongs. Brooks is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. He is already appealing his sentence. Joey Lawson was given 25 years in prison. Steve Lawson will spend 17 years behind bars. The most heartbreaking part, the most tragic part, is that Crystal's family may never get full closure. Crystal's body has still not been found. That remains the biggest mystery in this whole case. This case had gone on for more than 10 years by the time it got into a courtroom. Many people in the community worried that day would never come. Although there is some relief from the conviction and sentencing of Brooks, Joey, and Steve, many people would like to see investigators take this case further. During the trial, the prosecution referred to Nick and Rosemary as unindicted co-conspirators. Many people wonder what's next. And then there's the question of, what about Tommy Ballard? What happened to him? Will anyone ever be charged with his murder? The community as a whole is healing from it since the convictions. There are still many unanswered questions which may or may not ever get answered, and that's hard to face.